There's a book by Douglas Brackman called Driven, and he talks about how the entrepreneurship gene is epigenetic. 10% of people only experience dopamine in pursuit of the goal, where 90% of people experience dopamine upon the attainment of the goal. It's the difference between the hunter brain and the farmer brain. 10% of people have hunter brains, where it's the pursuit that really jazzes them. And in a weird way, and you've probably experienced this, when you achieve the goal, it's deflating, it's depressing. Dude, I sold my business for an 8-figure sum of money, and then I just got super depressed and had an existential crisis, which people hear and they get really frustrated because they're like, screw you. You know, you got this whole bag of money and now you're unhappy, but that's the way that we're built. It's the way that we're wired. 90% of people want to attain the goal. And that's actually a more feasible framework. But we look at those 90% like they're sheep, and they're not.
I'm really excited to welcome Kasim Aslam to the $1 Million Agency Podcast. Kasim has a rich history in the agency space. He's very passionate about helping entrepreneurs. He's passionate about leveraging workforces that are outside the United States. Let's give an opportunity to some amazing people from around the world. There are talented people, very, very intelligent, and they haven't been gobbled up by all of the top tech companies like they have in the United States. So I am really excited. Welcome to the show, Kasim. I'd love to hear who you are and just kind of like find out more about you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Always grateful for a microphone. I've built 6, 7, and 8-figure businesses. I've had 2 exits, 1 for 8 figures. I built the #1 ranked Google Ads agency in the world, and I'm very humble. Just kidding. That's my YouTube intro, actually, is Alex Hormozi gave me the advice that you always introduce yourself on every video, because unlike what other people say, which is talk to people as though you're friends, he's like, they're not your friends. And you need to let people know, hey, here's why you're paying attention to me. So it sometimes can feel a little icky to be like, here's my resume. And yet it's kind of the world that we live in, you know, like attention is commoditized down to a point to where people need a soundbite. And, you know, for whatever it's worth, I've cracked the code on professional services, which, by the way, is the worst of all humble brags, because it's just the dumbest business model. Like, if I wish I was smart enough to understand SaaS and e-com, or the really, truly ultra scalable things. I never got there. I figured out the professional services space pretty well. And so that's where I hang my hat.
What's easy for one person is not for another. You know, I know after spending 7 years running a SaaS company, how little I know about SaaS. It's one of those things, the more you learn, the more you realize, we're like, wow, I know that I don't know a lot, but I know a little more than I did a year ago when I was making this set of foolish mistakes, you know?
Yeah, it's funny too, because I think far too often what people don't realize is the folks that have been successful in a space aren't the experts. They're the people that were dumb enough to take the leap. You know, it's actually like expertise holds you back more than it helps you at a certain point. You just need to just say, hey, I'm going to figure this out as I go. There's a certain amount of hubris in entrepreneurship that's kind of fun to play with.
Yeah, like Steve Jobs, right? The people who think that the people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who actually do. Right?
Yeah, really, truly.
So, Kasim, you've had these exits and you've been in the agency space quite a bit. From our past conversations, it's really obvious to me that you have a ton of passion for people. Like you're a relationship people type person, and at least one of your businesses was built around connecting Americans with people that are outside of the United States to leverage some of their amazing skills and abilities at a price that allows us to be more profitable within the United States. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I've got a staffing agency. I find, train, and place people out of Latin America to be executive assistants specifically, which I think is the most important role for an entrepreneur to hire for. That's one of the questions I get all the time is like, what should my first hire be, or what should my next hire be? And if you don't have an assistant, and you don't have to come hire from me, by the way, like there are a bunch of really good adept assistants, but you are always going to be the least scalable part of your business. Almost by definition, because you're the founder. And so putting yourself in a position to be able to free up your time and delegate tasks and ideate and, you know, have kind of a you clone, which is hopefully what your assistant ends up becoming. It's just one of the closest things to an easy button that exists in the world of entrepreneurship. And the sooner you're able to do it, the faster you can go, and with greater ease. And you start to kind of get addicted. At least I did. You get addicted to this framework, this flywheel. Because the cool thing about an assistant role is, unlike every other role that exists, it doesn't have to have a job description. I'm actually a really, really big believer in the fact that if you don't have a clear job description, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. for every role except your assistant. And your assistant's role, the job description is you're just going to do what I don't want to do. You're going to help me with all the things. And what's interesting about that is if you give somebody 10 things to do, they're going to suck miserably at two of them. They're going to do six just fine. Check the box. We did it. We're done. And they're going to do two of them better than any human has ever done anything in the history of proficiency. And what's crazy to me is most of the business world zooms in on the two things they suck at. And they go, all right, Johnny, we're going to get you there. And here's a performance improvement program. And you're going to take training and shadow Lisa because Lisa's great at this. And don't worry, over time, we'll get you up to snuff. And in my mind, I'm like, just stop making them do those two things and go focus on the two things that they're literal miracles at. And so I like the role of executive assistant because the flywheel becomes, let me figure out what it is that you are a genius at and let me build a role around that. My first EA became my director of automations. She was a passably good executive assistant. She was an amazing mind for automations. And dude, that's a hard thing to find somebody who's good at. A real true strong, her name was Julianne, a real true strong process mind, difficult. And every time we would move into anything process based, she would just melt it. Like she was the sun and it was ice cream. Like she would just melt these problems away. And the result was always something of beauty. It was always a truly beautiful, elegant process. So I made her my director of automations. And when I sold my agency, I had the most over-engineered, I can't even describe to you the infrastructure. It was all built on Airtable. My entire agency was run out of this Airtable relational database instance that she built from the ground up. I had an EA who became my director of social because she loved the communication piece and the social. One of my EAs became my CTO, managed my entire exit, is now my best friend, and is my business partner at Pareto Talent. But the thing that's interesting is in each of those instances, there was a bunch of stuff they sucked at. So that's kind of the point. That's what's really fun about this role is it's an incubator for talent, and you get to see here's what you're good, here's what you're not good at, and let me go massage my business around you, which is actually how I think business should be run. Everybody, and this is dude, every business book I've ever read treats people like they're a nameless, faceless, interchangeable commodity. It's like we're all Quicken Loans. And it's like, oh, you just build a process and you take a human and you install them into this process and then they check all the boxes. And it's like, well, what if every human being were a literal miracle? I on an archetypal religious level, what if you really believed that? What if you believed that every single person was a literal miracle? And I'm not using the word literal the way millennials use it. I'm using it as with true understanding. The likelihood of your existence adjusted for margin of error is zero. If you take into consideration everything at play for you, Patrick, to be here right now, like you are a miracle and you're capable of things that defy articulation. And so let's say that you and I worked together for me to be like, oh, Patrick's going to sit in this box and do what I tell him. I've nullified all your value as a miracle. And I've just made you something like an automaton. And I think that if employers start to reframe how they look at their employees, because we don't want to build Quicken Loans, right? I don't. Maybe somebody does. And, I hope they fail because it's a shit business that treats people like shit.
Yeah.
Instead,
there's no impact there.
There's no, dude. Yeah. It's just like, oh, we're just going to, what's the EBITDA for our investors? Who cares? Screw you. But if we want to go build a business that really makes an impact, and that's the problem is it's overwhelming because, like when I sold Solutions 8, I had 30 client managers. Well, as an employer, it's hard to think about one person 30 times. It's easy to think about 30 people one time.
Mm-hmm.
So then you just start building. And that's why as organizations grow, they get bureaucratic. But when you're small, you really get to treat people like miracles. And when you treat them like miracles, they actually, they give you miracles in return. And that's why these small, nimble organizations are so impactful. So that's the ask. If you're listening to this right now, if you're a small entrepreneur, you're being taught and told to commoditize people when in reality, your only value proposition, the only reason you're better than these large organizations that have way more money, way more time, way more pedigree, way more experience, way more backing, way more connections, the only thing you have on them is they can no longer treat the cogs that are in their machine as miracles and you can. Which is why, dude, one person who's functioning as a miracle can pull off many multiples what a group of 1,000 people that are all just rowing on the boat. You know what I mean? And that's the opportunity that's ahead of us. And when you view people that way, it changes and reframes everything. That got super preachy. So
Oh,
forgive.
I love it. I love it. It's so it feels so healthy in kind of in a world that, like you said, it's about profit, it's about revenue and EBITDA and like it's, hey, what's our margin and all this stuff. We get lost in the most human part of business where it just becomes numbers
Mm,
and metrics, and it's really beautiful to kind of like bring it back to for a lot of us when we start the business, we may not be thinking like, hey, I want to have this margin in this. It's like, I want to do something great. I want to create something. But somewhere along the way, when our head's down, we're in the weeds, we forget that our companies are made up of a group of people with their own lives and their own dreams. And, they just become, like you said, it's like just going down the assembly line, right? Where it's just printing off this. And that's what you do. You can easily be replaced by a robot because you're just a part of a system. So, Kasim, you hit on a couple things. We bring someone in, and the job really starts to become, well, how do we identify what is that 2 in 10 thing that they're great at, right?
mm.
How do we go from we bring them in, we know that we need an assistant, and for a lot of us, we're hiring somebody with a very specific intent to solve a problem for something that we don't like. How do we make sure that we're hiring that thing we don't like lines up with the 2 out of 10 thing that they love and they're great at?
Yeah. So a couple of notes there. There's a lot to unpack, and I'll do my best, and then keep me honest, Patrick. If there are questions I'm not answering, I'm not trying to dodge them. Uh, I just want to be thorough along the pillars that would be necessary to kind of build this structure. So that the first and most important thing to say, and I'm going to offend all the people in the world, so let's do this, is effective delegation presupposes that you have somebody effective to delegate to. And we'll sit with that for a minute. If you're in the emerged world, right? If you're in the Western world, if you're here in the United States, let's say, or even Western Europe or Canada, most of the talent has been gobbled up. It's my opinion. If somebody truly is a peak performer, let's say, like the Pareto distribution, I name my company Pareto Talent because it's the idea is the mathematical principle that 20% of the input is responsible for 80% of the output, which ends up being true along every level analysis in every organic ecosystem. It's insane. It's one of the most important concepts to understand in business and in life. So if that's true, the 20% of people that really make 80% of the impact, those 20% in the emerged world have been taken because they want to work for Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, the Fortune 1000. They want benefits that you and I can't do. Even if I wanted to pay for the benefits because my business is so small, I can't afford, like they don't sell them to me because you have to have a large enough pool. And even if I could match the salaries that those companies are paying, I can't match the pedigree. I don't have a high rise with conference rooms and $12 croissants and, the fun getaways and there's it's an entirely different world that I am incapable of competing with. So either the high-end talent wants to do that, and so should they, by the way. God bless them. That's a better offer. If you want to be an employee, 90% of the world is built and structured to be an employee. They're not built to be entrepreneurs. Then that's the better offer. Or the better offer might be, like the stock option unicorn startup. Or the better offer might be, by the way, just being built, starting your own business. And we've made it so easy in this country. God bless it, dude. Like, I'm so grateful to be here. I was raised by a blind single mother on disability in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm a welfare baby. I
Wow.
produced a $250,000 net worth. And I'm smart. I worked hard, whatever. It's because I'm here. I could have been born on the other side. My father's Pakistani. I could be from Pakistan and then just not exposed to the opportunity. So I love, 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 love this country. I carry a copy of the Constitution on my backpack, which
Wow.
maybe is a little weird and aggressive. I'm saying that just to say I'm not trying to slander our collective environment. What I'm trying to say though is the the ecosystem for employment is built in a way that either you're working for a great big company or you're working for yourself because it's so easy to be an entrepreneur here. Anybody left over, and this is where I'm going to be offensive, is left over for a reason. So I'm going to go pick on my cousin. I have a cousin who I love to death, dearly and deeply, with everything inside of me. Work isn't his bag. It's not what he wants to do. It's not his focus. He's a phenomenal human. He's a phenomenal father, husband, human being, I'd never hire him. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because he's not that guy. He's not a Pareto person. He's not the 20% that makes the 80% of impact. I love him, but that's who's left to me as a small business owner is I wouldn't call them. I want to avoid a pejorative. It's the people who are not career minded, let's say. They have
Mhm.
other priorities. So we end up beating our head against the wall. And you hear things like, oh, it's so hard to find good help. If you want something done, do it you're right. Nobody wants to work these days. Well, no, that's not true. You just can't compete in the ecosystem you're in. So the trick there is to go to a different ecosystem. It's why I like going to international markets. Because in international markets, and this is still true today, I don't know how long it will be true, but it would be racist to think that the rest of the world doesn't produce the same percentage of intelligent and hardworking people as we do, right? And yet, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook are not gobbling up all the talent, all the rest of the world yet. They might be someday. So you can go to Latin America, South Asia, Eastern Europe, North Africa, and you find triple PhD, brilliant, hardworking, motivated people, and you become the aspiration for them. The same way a kid here wants to work for Google, Amazon, Microsoft, or Facebook, they just want to work for a U.S. company getting paid in the U.S. dollar because our currency won't collapse on them for a whole bunch of reasons we can get to, is like the petrodollar and the tyranny of the central bank and all that. You find yourself in a position as an employer, and this is a unique position to be in, where people are actually grateful for the job. And dude, I don't know about you, but until I went international, I never felt that. I remember the very last US hire I made before I was like, I'm not doing this again, was a young man named Oren. And I won't give Oren's last name away because his first name's already so unique.
Yeah.
Oren was unbelievably smart and unbelievably talented and unbelievably lazy. And if I asked him to do something, maybe it would get done and maybe it wouldn't. And if it didn't get done, he'd have a whole bunch of reasons why it was a stupid task in the first place. And then within about a month of working for me, he told me, yeah, I've got some buddies that are going to Paris on a vacation. I'm going too. Didn't ask, and it was, what's my title and when do I get a raise? And just like the entitlement that we've all as employers complain about. And I'm like, dude, I'm not playing this game with you anymore. And I'm sure Oren's doing just fine now because it's someday you grow up and maybe he's a small business owner. God bless him. I hope he's great. And I've never had to deal with that again. The people I hire are so grateful. And I think that gratitude needs to be built into the fabric of what it is we're doing. And in order to instill gratitude, you have to do a couple of things. You have to treat them well. You have to treat them like real humans. And so many people that hire offshore, I'm going to screenshot your desktop and I'm going to chain you to your desk and you're going to have to work these hours and I'm going to make you do this garbage grunt work. And then they have a bad experience with those employees and they wonder why. And instead, what I'd say is pay them many multiples what they'd be able to make domestically, because winners want to win. If you want a peak performer, that's the other thing that's really interesting is, because we're taught to treat people like commodities, we trade people like commodities. And a commodity is interchangeable by definition. So if I have an ear of corn and you have an ear of corn and you and I trade, neither of us are better or worse off than we were a moment ago. So the idea would be, I want the most corn for the least amount of money. That's how you trade a commodity, is you get more for less. Well, when you do that with people, you're running counter to the Pareto distribution, because winners want to win. And the way that we win, the way that we keep score is money. And so if you really want a high quality employee, pay as much as you possibly can for that market. And what's crazy about it, and this is the thing that doesn't compute for most small business owners, is they think like, oh, I can't afford to do that. And what they don't realize is you need to pay 10 or 20 or 30% more than the high water mark. And you get somebody who does 10 times the amount of work. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not exaggerating. When I sold my business Solutions 8, and this is the Pareto distribution, one employee managed almost 50% of our revenue. His name is John Moran. He's the smartest Google Ads mind in the world. You can Google him. He's quoted on Reddit now as to what we do with Google Ads. One person, and I had having to give him equity because I couldn't afford to lose him, which is, by the way, the risk that you run when you bring on really, really, really top talent. But that's the risk that you want to run, because I gave him a little bit of equity for a massive lift. You'd rather have a smaller piece of a bigger pie. One employee managed 50% of our revenue, almost close to 50% of our revenue. And what's cool about the Pareto distribution is it's fractal. And what I mean by that is, let's say that you take 1,000-person organization. According to the Pareto distribution, 200 people are doing 80% of the work. And you're like, okay, that kind of makes sense to me. I understand. Well, wait a minute. Zoom in on those 200. Of those 200, 40 people are doing 80% of that work. Forgive me. But zoom in on the 40. 8 people are doing 80% of that, and so on and so forth. It's fractal. So when you get yourself one of these miracles, dude, the impact they have on your business it's incalculable, especially when you get out of their way. And the thing that's so funny is the entire business world, you have a hierarchical structure, this pyramid, where the higher up the hierarchy you go, the more output they provide. And the whole business world is trying to flatten the hierarchy. They're trying to get everybody to perform at the average. And so when you're one of the few people that's like, oh no, I'm actually going to go the other direction. I'm going to focus on the top of the hierarchy. And man, dude, I've done it over and over and over again. I had the highest performing real estate investment campaign on the planet before I'd ever run lead generation or invested in real estate. I built the #1 ranked Google Ads agency in the world. You want to know something insane? Open air conspiracy, Patrick? I've never run a Google campaign in my life, end to end. I wouldn't know how to. I just love people. I own the largest English-speaking Montessori community in the world. I'm not a trained Montessorian. I don't own a Montessori school. But I love people. So anything that you want to do, there's somebody out there that's going to be able to do it. And all you need to do is empower them. And if you can put yourself in that position, like, just get out of their way, dude. And then they move mountains. It's amazing.
I want to circle back in a second after we unpack this and I just process this a little bit to the how. How do we like identify this 20%? I watched Richard Branson speak about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now. And they asked him, they said, hey, Richard, how is it that you run 400 companies, but it looks like you spend all your time on Necker Island and kite surfing, and it's like you're having fun. And he had this 3-step process that is perfectly in alignment with what you're saying. So it's first, I get very clear on my vision. I got to find out exactly where I'm going. Then I find somebody else who's better than me at to execute it. And then I get out of the way and let them do their thing. Right. It sounds like what you're doing is like, you're bringing in these people and you're answering who, not how questions, right? It's like, who can do this? Not how do I do it? Let me find the best person who's passionate about this problem I need to solve. And let's set them up for success and let's make them feel like this is the best company in the world, even if we can't compete with them with the high rises and the benefits that we're just not even eligible for because we don't have the size. But we treat them like they're the most important person in the world, and then they want to fight for us, and they're a part of this. They're a part of the dream.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're part of the dream. I mean, if there's a quote that I'm going to butcher, but one of the fastest ways to achieve your dreams is to help other people achieve theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And most people aren't built to be entrepreneurs. That's the other thing that's really interesting. Entrepreneurs are dismissive of non-entrepreneurs, which is funny because I actually think the non-entrepreneurial types are better humans. And I mean that not as there's a book by Douglas Brackman called Driven, and he talks about how the entrepreneurship gene is epigenetic. 10% of people only experience dopamine in pursuit of the goal, where 90% of people experience dopamine upon the attainment of the goal. It's the difference between the hunter brain and the farmer brain. 10% of people have hunter brains, where it's the pursuit that really jazzes them. And in a weird way, and you've probably experienced this, when you achieve the goal, it's deflating, it's depressing. Dude, I sold my business for an 8-figure sum of money, and then I just got super depressed and had an existential crisis, which people hear and they get really frustrated because they're like, screw you. You know, you got this whole bag of money and now you're unhappy, but that's the way that we're built. It's the way that we're wired. 90% of people want to attain the goal. And that's actually a more feasible framework. But we look at those 90% like they're sheep, and they're not. They're not. They're smart, important, industrious, conscientious, proactive, as long as they're treated that way. We may be in the driver's seat, at least in the beginning, because the entrepreneurs get things started, right? We're the dummies talking in the very beginning about the people that are stupid enough to think we actually can make an impact. Regardless of whether or not we can, it ends up being true. But then you take one of the 90%, and if you choose wisely, they go further and faster than you'll ever go. Because the things that entrepreneurs are good at, starting, right? Like the catalyst, we're not good at the other half of that. Somebody told me once, it's like, you're really good at having babies. You're not very good at raising them. And I love to start businesses, but as soon as it started, I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. It doesn't matter how profitable it is. It's not fun because I'm not solving new problems.
Yeah, it's the visionary versus the integrator. Like the entrepreneurs, we love to be visionaries. We have these amazing ideas, and then once the idea is hatched and passed off, then like we don't want to be the one that's checking the boxes and doing the thing, right? we want to be the one that comes up with the idea for the thing, which I feel this a lot in my own business, right? There's things I can do, but they are miserable for me to be going through on a daily basis. And like, is this done? Is this done? What's this like, that's not me, but I love the idea of these big problems where I'm like being creative and having an impact, coming up with something that no one's invented before. That fills my cup. Right. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And we do know those people, and I 100% agree with you on this idea. There is like a dismissive towards this. And it almost feels like when two people are rooting for two different sports teams,
Mm.
and you're like, I don't like this guy because he's
Yeah, you're a Cowboys fan, I'm a Steelers fan,
yeah,
and
it's
we're
like
just yeah.
it seems so ridiculous when you zoom out and think about it. But everybody's got their own map on how they're going through the world. And if you had their brain and their experiences, your map would be just like theirs, and you would be making those choices, but you don't. Like, we're all
Right.
unique. So how can you judge when you're looking at their map through the lens of yours and saying like, well, that's not as good. And that's just I think it's really short-sighted and almost in a way unevolved to just like decide the worth of somebody based on whatever ambitions they have. That they may love something else that's not related to work at all. Hey, I love to play golf or spend time with my family. Can we look down on them for that because they don't want to be an entrepreneur? But I totally get it. And I feel this all the time in these entrepreneurial circles and masterminds.
I do too. It's weird to see the way that people tend to, my friend Perry Belcher, he's my business partner at Driven. He's a mentor of mine. He's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. I've never met a human who can skate to where the puck is going better than Perry. You just see, it's like he has a crystal ball. He sees the future. And one thing he said to me that I really appreciated is he goes, you should never hate your customer. And I thought that we were talking to a gentleman who serves a specific demographic that he actually doesn't like very much, which is weird. It's like, and this isn't it, but just to simplify it, it'd be like, you hate Trump supporters, but you sell Trump hats.
Yeah.
And I feel that's true, not just with your clients. I feel that's true with anybody in your business. Like, I have a lot of friends who don't like their employees. Like they actually don't respect them. And I see this a lot in the high ticket closing game, actually, where, the closers look at the setters like, oh, they're a dime a dozen and it's going to take 20 setters to yield one good one anyway. And so they put them through this boiler room, and it ends up being kind of this really caustic, very toxic environment. And a lot of people came up through that too. That's the trial by fire that a lot of entrepreneurs go through. So I think that'll hopefully resonate with some people. But, what if the reverse were true? What if you had a deep respect and admiration for this type of person that has all these skills that you don't have, and an appreciation for the fact that you have skills that they don't have? Because now, what a fun yin yang picture we get to paint together. I feel like that ends up happening pretty naturally, actually, when you do find those partnerships. But for most entrepreneurs, at least for me, I think in the beginning, it happens by accident. And the point that I hope I'm trying to make or marshaling towards is that you can actually engineer this into your system, as long as you kind of start to see what puzzle pieces need to be in place for the framework to work.
How do you do that? How do we engineer these pieces, and how do we identify this 20%? What are you looking for? What skill do you have that has allowed you to get the best of the best of the best?
I've got a whole framework. You can have it for free, by the way. I wrote a book. It's called Hire. I meant to publish it before the end of February, and I failed. So when it's available, Patrick, I'll share it with you. I'll share it with your audience. Everybody can have it. No gate, no opt-in. I'm not trying to capture contacts. What I am trying to do, though, is increase the number of people that hire internationally. That's my goal. I'll give you this snippet version, the infographic version. Hiring is just like marketing in that it's a sales funnel. And a bunch of people go in the top and very few people go in the bottom. So when you're trying to find peak performers, when you're trying to find what I call Pareto talent, it's a needle in a stack of needles. And what's so stupid to me is the entire hiring world functions off of resumes and interviews. Resumes tell you nothing and interviews tell you nothing, because everybody's resume looks stellar, or maybe it doesn't. And then you discard people that could be really, really amazing. And then everybody's made interviewing an art, or they haven't. And then you're judging them according to the skill set that probably has nothing to do with the job. So I've reversed the process almost entirely. The first thing that you do is you build in what I call fly traps. And so if you read one of my job descriptions, the very first part of the job description says when you submit, your submission has to read, actually read the instructions. And that's the first fly trap. And then I'll probably have 7 or 8 fly traps embedded in every single job description. So little things like, answer this question. What does this quote mean to you? And I really like Khalil Gibran's quote, work is love made visible. And then I'll ask them for a copy of their resume, but I want it in PDF format, or I want a link instead of an attachment, or doesn't matter what, but I just want to know little, can you pay attention? I want it, this naming convention, last name dot first name dot role, like little teeny tiny things. I have them take a personality test just to see if they'll do it. Anybody who doesn't follow those initial instructions gets discarded. Here's what's crazy. Out of thousands of submissions, usually more than half aren't following the basic instructions. So that tells you they're not really in it to win it, right? They're just they're a batch and blast. Let me send out as many applications as I can until I get a job. Once you have filtered out the people that aren't paying attention, the people that are left are still not necessarily viable candidates. Here's what I like to do. I like to, I'll filter out by formatting, for instance. If you don't format your communication with me in a way that's clean and easy to engage with, why would I want to employ you? Especially if we're going to be in a remote working environment. So there's kind of those intrinsic qualification factors that a lot of people don't take into consideration. So you have to follow all my instructions. I have an EA who's filtering this out. You can automate a lot of this with AI too. Once I've created something of a short list of people that I'm pseudo excited about, let's say there's 10 to 20 folks that I think could be a good fit for this role. I'll reach out to them and I'll say, hey, Patrick, love your submission. Thanks so much for all the instructions. I've been hiring people for 20 years. I know enough to know that interview's not going to tell me anything until we work together. Let me pay you for a trial project. I'll pay you X dollars for 2 hours of your time. All my projects are about 2 to 4 hours. In international markets, $50 is more than enough to justify. It's not going to make anybody rich, but it'll pay for 2 hours. So I'll pay you $50 for 2 hours of your time. How's that sound? If you're game, send me your PayPal, and I'll PayPal you the money, or your Venmo, or your Payoneer, or whatever. Here's the funny part. So first of all, you do that with 10 people. Let's say it's $500, and you might think to yourself, like, oh my goodness, $500. That's it. The expenditure in order to identify top talent is worth many, 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 many times a recruiter, and recruiters don't go through this process. Here's the cool part, though, is when people send me their PayPal address, I pay them, and then I don't follow up. And I get to see, first of all, who ghosts me, because it's like, well, if you're willing to ghost me for $50, then it's thank God I didn't hire you.
It's money well spent.
Yeah, who forgets? Because I have people follow up 2-3 weeks later and say, hey, you sent me money and you never sent me the project. And I'm like, oh, you don't say. Because you're the type of person that I now need to manage. I don't want people I need to manage. I want people that run through walls, that like can't not do the damn thing. So, if you take 10 people or 20 people, you spend $500 to $1,000. You run the trial project. However many people don't respond, ghost, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then you send them the trial project. And the trial project is relevant to the task at hand. And I'll do a couple of things there too. Like I'll send a trial project and I'll say, hey, let's say I'm doing a designer or something. I need you to design these graphics. Here's a login to Canva with all of the assets. I'll send them the wrong username and password. And then I'll say, based off of the scope of work, when do you think this is done? I send it to them on Monday. They tell me it's going to be done by Friday. And I'm like, great, here are all the assets that you need. I send them the wrong username and password to log into this app. And then I wait to see when they follow up with me. Because if you told me you're going to be done on Friday and you follow up Thursday night, now I know you're a procrastinator. I want to know they can manage expectations. I want to know they can review a scope. I want to know they can fulfill. I want to know they communicate. I want to know, and then I want to know what their product delivery is like. And by the time, and the process is way more robust than that. I give you the short version. But by the time you get to the end, you have bloodthirsty killers, trained assassins, people that are just, and you get to see their end result. If you're hiring a graphic designer, give them a graphic design project. If you're hiring a media buyer, give them a media buy project. Software developer, give a software developer project. If you're hiring a client manager, give them, like anecdotally speaking, we're running ads for Patrick and the campaign's suffering in these ways and we want to bring it back around. Here's the recommendations we want to make. Explain to them what's wrong. Explain to them how we're going to improve it. Shoot them a video. And now I need to know, because a client manager needs to communicate negative news in a way that's not going to scare off the client, emphasize retention, show them the go forward. There's not a project in the world that you can't build a trial project around that will show you who's going to be good and who's going to be bad at this. And when you get to the end of this process, you just pick who the best culture fit is. I know who I'm going to hire before I do interviews. I just do interviews for this, like the sake of getting to know you. And then what's nice is it's an expectation management piece for me on how well are we going to work together. I like to know that people are culture fits. I think culture is one of the most important parts about building a business. And when you here's the thing that employers do wrong when they follow my process. and I've been teaching this for a long time, so gotten to see this over and over and over. They hire a peak performer, and then they go and they put them in their cesspool of a boiler room. Don't do that. If you hire a peak performer and then you sit there and you look over their shoulder and you're like, oh, change the square to a circle and change the red to blue and clock in and clock out and come ask me before you take your bathroom break, you're going to burn them. You're that person. You're a soul sucking. You're, a succubus or an incubus or whatever. Like, it's you. You're the problem, not them. Get the F out of their way. It's called the black box of delegation. I want this desired end result. I want this, whatever it is. I want this completed website, this completed training program, this completed whatever. I want this desired end result. And allow me to define that for you with as much specificity as is necessary for you and I to understand what the desired end result is. Here's everything available to you. Here's the money I'm willing to spend, all of the assets, the software programs, other stakeholders, other employees, vendors, strategic partners, whatever. This is my desired end result. This is everything you can use. Input, output. What happens in the middle? None of your freaking business. And the employers that want to sit there and manage, you're the problem. You're the reason that your employees operate this way. And what I've also noticed, and this is sadly true of younger entrepreneurs, they're afraid of competence. They're afraid of people that are smarter than them, better than them, more effective than them, because they're like, oh gosh, I'm going to get found out. And so they hire manageable people, but manageable people need to be managed.
Yeah.
Find people that are better than you and then watch them run away with a project where you're like, oh gosh, I never could have done that in my life. And if you can get out of their way, it's a miracle, man. Just to bring this whole conversation full circle, you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I'm so lucky that all these amazing, stellar people work for me, and they just do it. They just go and they run, and you look at me, I'm so much more successful than I deserve to be. Like I look homeless, and I kind of Forrest got my way through life, and it's because I've just surrounded myself with people that are smarter than me, and I build a symbiotic relationship to where it's win-win. And dude, it's gone so unbelievably well, but it's actually, in my mind, it's easy math. It's arithmetic with humans. It's when I win, you win, and I'm not going to bug you in the way that you do things. And can you please comply with, the things that are necessities for me, my boundaries, my prerequisites, my values. And what a fun way to conduct business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this whole idea of kind of this transactional leadership versus transformational leadership, where you're not telling them what to do and you're just saying, hey, here's the end result. And because you've chose the best of the best, they like to figure it out. They want to. That's their passion. We don't want to rob them of it by doing this. And honestly, if we've hired the right person, we shouldn't know how to do that thing anyway. They're supposed to be better at it. So, which leads me to my next question, Kasim, is like, you said earlier that you're hiring these people that do things that you don't know how to do. And I'm wondering, like, for some of these test projects, so for instance, the media buyer, if you're not a professional media buyer, how do you know that they're completing the test project in a way that is going to, they've checked all the other boxes and they do it? And how do you analyze this and say, like, I don't know how to analyze this. How do I know that what they did is great?
First of all, what an amazing question. It's one of my favorites. And I think this is where the entrepreneurial spirit really comes into play full force. You and I have that spirit of adventure. The entrepreneur, and the listener probably does too. If you're listening to this podcast, I imagine you're an entrepreneur and you're not an employee. So to take an average person and throw them into the deep end and say, hey, go figure out if that media buyer knows what the hell they're doing, that's not a reasonable expectation of an employee.
Right.
That's what you could do that. I could do that. And in my mind, it's very Socratic. If somebody can't explain something simply, they don't understand it well enough. So I'm going to sit down and be like, hey, I need you to explain this to me like I'm 12. And then you explain it to me like I'm 12. And then I'll say, I need you to explain it to me like I'm 5. And you explain it to me like I'm 5. And once you've done that, I probably now know enough to begin asking, why not this way? What about these things? What if we were to make it better? What if we were to make it more effective? How do we mitigate risks? What do other people think or say or do? And so you can go to school on any, this is going to sound arrogant. Maybe it won't. I think I could do heart surgery with a weekend's worth of training on YouTube, and maybe a heart surgeon on 911 that I got to, right? Like, you can learn enough about anything to start to understand who your believable parties are. I don't need to know how to be a media buyer in order to vet a media buyer. I just need to get really connected to you. And as long as I'm doing my job in kind of vetting who I choose to be the believable party, Now I have somebody that I get to make the cornerstone of whatever that department is. Once you have your cornerstone person, they're your vet. They're your benchmark. They're your pillar, your lighthouse. So, and what's really cool is then you never need to do that again. So you find the one, your Neo, right? That really you're like, you're the person that I want to build this entire department around. And I did that over and over and over again at Solutions 8. Angelia ran our onboarding department. She was the best onboarding person in the whole wide world. I've never met anybody better. And as soon as I found Angelia, she and I worked together to build the onboarding department. I didn't know anything about building onboarding. It was all her ideas, her creativity, her approach. But it was me just being the what if, why not, what about, how do we mitigate? And then once we had it, then Angelia trained all the other onboarding people. Leandra ran my client management department. John Moran ran my strategist department. Like, you need one pillar, one lighthouse, and you need to know enough to just be their sounding board, just be their strategic partner. So you don't have to be a genius in this thing. You just need to stress test their ideas. And it's their job to educate you enough to be able to do that. And if they can't do that, they don't know it well. And you'll see that, right, dude. I'm like, you can take physicists, like a nuclear physicist could, in a couple of hours, explain to me what they're doing enough to where I could actually have, kind of a fun, like, well, what about this? What do we do there? It's very difficult to find areas of your business where this isn't possible. You will find people that build iron curtains on purpose. I had a software engineer like this. I hired a gentleman who had a lot of respect for what he did and a lot of respect for how he did it. And he ended up being really important to my business. And at a certain point, he stopped talking to me about what he was doing. It was like being questioned was now beneath him. And I just needed to, and that relationship didn't last very long. It's a good way to be held hostage. So you need to make sure that, and that's, a values thing. And that's why I think culture is so important. If you're not open and you're not willing to document your work, you're done. We're out. Because I'm building a business and all businesses, if they get big enough, Henry Ford didn't know how to build a Ford, right? If you want to build a business that's bigger than you, there's going to be things you don't know how to do. And so you need to build into the culture of your business that level of transparency. And those people that like to build those islands, those silos, those airlocks, they're poisonous, dude. And I think that, there's nothing, you cannot get rid of them faster.
Right.
I should say.
Yeah. It's coming from a scarcity mindset. They're trying to lock in their position and their value through this kind of hostage strategy. So one last, this has been amazing. I've got kind of one question left here. We're trying to qualify these people. We spend a lot of time, like, once we have them to that spot, right, of like how we're going to pick them up. We've got the tripwires that we have built in, and then the questions and the interview process and the test project. How do we fill up our pipeline with these people? Are you guys is this a recruiting where we're doing outreach to maybe looking at the top competitors in this space, trying to pull their people? What's the strategy to locate these people to even get in our funnel?
It's a classic traffic problem, right? So every funnel needs traffic. And the benefit you have with most positions is the job boards are going to bring you a significant amount of traffic. And if you're paying more than most people are paying, what I tell people is you have to pay 10% more than the high water mark. It's an easy thing to misunderstand because you think 10% more, that's not too bad. And that's not what I said. 10% more than the high water mark means you take the entire range. So just to use easy math and round numbers, let's say that a role pays 75 grand to 100 grand in this market. So something pays 75 to $100,000 a year. Well, the high water mark is 100, which means you need to pay 110 or more. And now all of a sudden you're looking at it and you're like, crap, I can get somebody for 75 and you want to pay 110. But if you're willing to pay 10% more than the high water mark or more, and if I'm in international markets, I'll pay multiples. Like the average Indian media buyer was being paid by Google $450 a month. My top media buyer in India, when I sold my business, was being paid $9,000 a month. Wow. But he was managing my biggest client. And he's one of the smartest humans I've ever known in my entire life. And he's worth his weight in literal gold. He was amazing. He was amazing. So of course I pay him that. So pay as much as you can afford to pay, and you'll never have a traffic problem again. Because winners want to win. And people are like, dude, you're going to pay me what? The only question I get is this a scam? And when you build enough pedigree, I had enough pedigree at Solutions 8. Now I have enough pedigree with my recruiting agency to where people know, like, no, it's legit. Go to my Glassdoor, go to my reviews. We're the real deal. Here's why I pay more. Here's what I tell people, though. I'm going to pay you more than anybody's ever going to pay you in your market. And my expectations are unreasonably high. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if this job is worth it. That's how high my expectations are. I'm going to pay you this much, but my expectations are 1% higher than my pay. Now, is that true? I don't know, but it computes well. it computes well for them to know, like, okay, this guy's paying a lot because he wants the best. And that unto itself has an intrinsic qualification. Because you get your people, like my cousin who I mentioned earlier, who are like, I'm not even applying for that job. Because I want somewhere where I can kind of like, fade into the background and take a long lunch. And those people know, don't come apply. Don't come talk to me. You're not going to last here. I will melt your face before you even get through the door. So that's if you have a really ultra specific skill set that you need, if you're like, oh gosh, we're doing an integration on this old software and I need a Ruby on Rails developer that also knows this thing and has worked with this product, then you can do outreach. But I promise you, if you're paying 10% more than the high watermark for any job that's not obscure, you'll never have a traffic problem.
I love it. Yeah. It's attracting them with what they want. Winners want to win. They want to be at the top of it, and they know that it's worth it for them, right?
Right.
They
Well,
value
dude, let them work from home on a semi-flexible schedule. Most people in the States, that's become kind of the ubiquitous truth for us. People in international markets, that is unheard of. And it ends, not to get preachy, but the impact that you have on people's lives, it's insane. The young man that I mentioned from India who's making $9,000 when we sold, he bought his parents the first home the family has ever owned. He got himself married, which in India is a super big deal and super expensive. He bought himself a motorcycle. Like, you have anthropological significance. Imagine letting a mom stay home when she has kids around that. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a big deal. And so it's not just when you pay in more ways than just money. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
yeah, you treat them well, high quality of life, give them meaningful work, and goodness gracious, dude, people are just like, and then they're miracles.
Yeah.
And they
We
move mountains for you.
we'll never understand the impact of the butterfly effect that we have, right?
Yeah,
Like it goes on so much beyond like the mother staying home. Maybe her kids are raised in a way where they're more giving, and then that passes on to their next generation, and
100%.
like, maybe she avoids health problems because she has decades less of stress. Maybe
Right.
she's able to exercise in the afternoon. We'll just never understand, and that's okay. But it's like it's important to understand that it does exist. It's so much more than the money for these people and the way of life, being happy in a job. I've been fortunate enough to have some amazing people come to me, and what this conversation has changed my mindset on it. But people have taken a pay cut to come work for me because of the culture, because of the way we treat them, and how it feels.
Sure.
Like, yeah, it's and that's pretty awesome. Not that I'm paying them less, but that they've
Oh, dude,
chosen.
I read into that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Solutions 8. I'd have people that would outgrow me. I'd hire them at a place where I'm paying them more than they'd make domestically. But then because my agency got famous, we were the top Google Ads agency in the world, and people started getting poached from my agency because everybody knew that we were breeding the best. And I had people offered way more than I could ever even begin to match, and they're like, "No, we're not leaving." Exactly what you're saying. Culture is so important.
yeah, it's not about the money. Well, Kasim, I really appreciate you, man. This has been fantastic. I appreciate you not only for sharing this value, but just the whole message that you have towards the world, and what you're doing and why you're doing it is so refreshing in the agency space, which I think both of us know. Um, there's people in this world that aren't operating with the best intentions sometimes, and to have somebody like this where it's like, hey, I want to make the world a better place. I want to help out people in other countries so they have more opportunity. It's beautiful, and I'm so grateful for having you as a guest, and being able to spread that message to more people.
I appreciate you having me, man. This was awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Patrick. Take care, buddy.
Okay, take care, brother.